A guest on the Joe Rogan podcast asked if Joe could make a fire in the woods, and Joe, true to character, said, yes, I can, but making a fire in the woods is really hard, and surviving in the woods is really hard. And then Joe talked about his plan, his very serious plan, to leave Austin, Texas and flee to the woods when everything collapses. This is the Joe Rogan Plan B. Leave Austin and head to the woods. So how good is his plan? If his audience listens to him and does what he does, will they make it? Is Joe ready to survive the hardships of social and economic collapse? And what is Joe's Plan A? First, and I want to talk about these things. First, I'll say Joe gets really high marks for honesty. He knows a collapse is coming and that he'll need to do something about it, and he knows it won't be easy. And this topic brings up a truth that all of us should admit to one another, and admit especially to ourselves. Every single one of us has a Plan A. And Joe's Plan A is to live in the city until he can't live in the city anymore. That's his Plan A. And all of us are really good at justifying our Plan A, either by denial or procrastination. And for many of us, that is our Plan A, to believe what we want to believe, and that's it, and not to think about hard times. And therefore, there is nothing bad on our horizon. No need for a Plan B. Others of us acknowledge that there is a problem somewhere, that there's a problem at some level. And generally, we think we're going to be just fine as long as we have a bunch of extra stuff, toilet paper, some extra food cans in our pantry, a gun in the closet, some ammo under the bed. And for those of us, those things can become a kind of license to stop thinking about anything worse than a 3-day power outage. But Joe has thought a little bit farther than a 3-day power outage. And his first deduction is really important. It's this: you're dead if you stay in a city. And about this one, Joe really is dead right. And now, today, he still lives in Austin until the collapse finally happens. But when will he know that it's really the collapse? If a whole lot of bad stuff is starting to happen, like it did in 2020, is that the collapse, or is that just a little blip on the radar? But maybe when the power goes out, and maybe when the water goes out, or riots break out, truckers make no more deliveries of food, all at the same time, all this at the same time. Those are pretty clear signals. And at that point, Joe knows that the guys who run the utilities are going to be very easy trying to survive themselves, which means what? That the gas pumps won't work, the toilets don't work, the grocery store shelves will be empty, and they'll empty out in an hour. And Joe realizes that anyone stuck in the city is going to perish from what? Dehydration first, probably, dysentery, injury, hunger, violence from the lawless, or subsequent disease from the human corpses and the raw sewage lying around. If we think this through, and if we see what's happened in other crises that have happened even just in the last 100 years, what happens? What plays out from the moment of collapse for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 years? Now, Joe's next deduction is you have to go somewhere where there are resources, end quote. And Joe summarizes his Plan B destination as the woods. He says he's got a Toyota Land Cruiser with a 40-gallon gas tank, and his plan is to throw some stuff into that vehicle along with his family and head to the woods, where there might be resources like water and deer and rabbit and wild hogs and firewood. Now let's assume his tank is totally full, topped off to the top, and he keeps it that way just because he knows that no gas pumps will be working on the day of the collapse, or even if they are, they'll be empty because of the rush on gas from the thousands and thousands of other people who are trying to flee Austin. So let's assume that Joe has his gas, his guns, his bows, his arrows, his medical gear, some water purification gear, some water purification tablets. Those are small to pack. Some emergency food, an axe, a saw, some pots and pans, some rope, and of course all the other tools he needs to build shelters in the woods. But where now? The next question is, where are the woods? Where are the nearest woods to Austin? Where are the nearest woods with resources? There's nothing around Austin right now but dry, scrubby cedar and dry, scrubby mesquite. And because of the recent drought, it has become more desertified than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. The homeowners and the farmers who live there and who've stayed in the area are reporting that their wells have run dry. And those who can find a well driller are trying now to drill their 400-foot deep wells down to 800 feet, just to hit a deep aquifer. So look at a satellite image on Google. I mean, all of you who are planning, and I assume Joe has done this, the nearest woods to Austin, the nearest woods to water, that have water and have game, would be in the northeast. But how many miles away? And does Joe have his evacuation plan all mapped out on a real map? And I'm talking about a paper map, a map that he can stick in his truck and will have ready when the time comes. Because if he waits right up until the time that the crisis hits the fan, then his computers, his printer, his phones, and his GPS may not be working. So that paper map that he's already worked on, that's in his Land Cruiser, needs to guide him out of town, but on what streets, what roads? Well, what he needs to do is take certain back streets, since the main roads would be clogged with escaping automobiles, so many automobiles, that it may be impossible for any traffic to move, because gridlock happens in every unplanned evacuation. We can see that in history. Even in the southern states, in the United States, when a hurricane comes, people wait to the last minute to see if they may need to leave, and then by that time, and they try to leave, there's gridlock on the streets. There's a lesson to be learned there. So even if Joe's backup plan and his routes and his side streets are a really good, intelligent plan and a little bit more open, they will not be open for very long. So what's Joe's plan B for getting out of the city if he runs into that kind of thing? I mean, that's a scary thought, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom and scary. I'm trying to say Joe has done well to think through a lot of the first steps and what he's planning to do to get his family out of the city, because it could be a fatal place. But if he in the first 10 minutes he runs into this gridlock and there's nothing to do, and he's burning up all his gas by running the AC or whatever, or the heat in the car, what's the next step? Setting out on foot is the next step, with backpacks and canteens, water purification tablets. But that will not get him to the woods. So Joe may realize now, here's an idea for Joe and for all the rest of you all. All that wealth that he has in stocks and bonds and dollars will have lost value, maybe all their value at that time, especially anything held in the banks will have. And one idea which may improve his plan B is to invest in something better than a Land Cruiser. And I'm going to throw this out, this idea, a large truck outfitted with a plow bumper. And you all, maybe have seen this one in Mad Max. Joe can use something like this to slowly force his way through traffic bottlenecks toward his destination. I'm not talking about big destructive stuff, but if everything's stuck and he wants to get his family another mile down the road to a place where he can drive, he could push his way through if he had something like this. And then others could follow him once that he'd made a path. And if the rig was a dump truck, the steel dump bed, I mean, these things are really thick. They're good to withstand outlaws' bullets trying to shoot at you. He could carry 55-gallon drums of diesel, some extra ammunition, some more food and supplies, and maybe even a security detail of some commandos, some special operators who could accompany him out of town until he gets past the first perimeter of hate. And this is what Joe identifies correctly as his next deduction right here. You are in for a world of hate. He's talking about when the crisis hits and you're trying to move and you're trying to get out. Yes, you are in a world of hate. And this has been true in every social collapse. And many of the most normal people in a civilized nation can be transformed almost overnight into sociopaths. Not everybody, but many. Hunger makes nice people do very abnormal things, hateful things. Families with anything of value will be attacked and their belongings will be stolen by thieves who are stronger, but who are driven by hunger. That is a powerful driving force. So presumably, Joe, because he knows this, He's got with him an AR-15 or two, several Glocks, lots of magazines, lots of ammunition, not only for self-defense, but also for currency. 9mm ammunition, just a single bullet, will be one of the most fungible sources of currency when the digital currency collapses with everything else. So Joe's next point is this: did it bring things to kill animals? And presumably Joe packed his compound bow, some arrows. He's an archer. He's a good shot. And he has confidence that he can kill an animal every week, presumably animals which have not already been killed by all the other gun-owning Americans who are doing their shooting in the woods and their shopping in the woods. So how long is the game going to last when we don't have any other place to go for food except to the woods? And how many other people are thinking like Joe? So where is the greatest concentration of deer, for example, close to Austin? I mean, we can think about this. We can get data on this. We know the answer to that question. There are a lot in northern Arkansas. And that's kind of right at the end of Joe's gas tank range with his Land Cruiser. But if he burns a little bit more fuel, he'll make it into Missouri, a state whose hunters have killed about 100,000 more deer than the hunters in Arkansas have. So then maybe he's thinking that would be a good destination. I've got to get to the woods where I can hunt, where there are deer, where there are animal, where there's meat for my family. But if those deer happen to be all hunted out, I'm wargaming this thing, as all of us may need to do. If they're all hunted out by the time Joe gets there, and if he's out of fuel to drive to a better place, and then what? This brings us now to Joe's survive rating. What's his score for his plan? His plan B, getting out of the city, going to the woods. And I don't really need to say this myself, because Joe was honest enough to rate himself. And he really was honest. With blunt candor, Joe Rogan acknowledges that people who wait till the crash and then go to the woods and the wilderness probably will not make it. And their kids won't make it either. And that really is true. Joe's dead on target on a lot of these things as he just sits and thinks through rationally about what life is like if we don't have the stuff that we're used to having. Is there a better plan A? Is there a better plan B? Joe is correct about all these things. You stay in a city, you die. You're in for a world of hate. You must go somewhere where there are resources. And what resources will keep you alive long enough after you run out of canned chili and if the deer have run off? Okay, neighborliness. This is what resources we really need in a situation. Neighborliness instead of hate. We need neighborly sharing to make every resource go farther. We need neighborly cooperation for security. We need neighborly creativity to build a strong local replacement economy, a free market, a real free market. We need a community with a future. That is the resource that we need to be able to make it, to be able to survive. Community life is the resource that created civilization. From dirt in these farming communities in Western Europe and in the United Kingdom. And then when our forefathers came to the United States, and there was nothing there but dirt and some trees. Communities create not just renewable resources when they work together, but regenerative resources. And the knowledge base keeps growing as we keep sharing, trying to figure out how to live and do something with an axe and with wood and with the dirt and with growing difficulties. In every single zone of agricultural endeavor, it's different. The conditions are different. And that knowledge grows month by month, year by year. And the crops and animals keep reproducing. And mature communities, they hang together, they get through the hard times, they stick together, they create more developing character and wisdom. And then there's more honesty and dependability in a truly free market economy as people trade with one another. Growing families intermarry and then regenerate the local civilization, generation after generation. So contemplate this for a different plan A. What if Joe Rogan took some weekend trips with his family several months in advance of the collapse, or preferably even a couple of years. Now, we don't, of course, nobody knows when things are going to get really bad. We don't know. I'm not predicting. He can't know. I can't know. But what if he was able to find a place in, just for example, Missouri, about 1 tank of gas or 1.5 tanks of gas from where he lives? Not in the woods, but in a small farming community, a small farming county, a developed property, what if he could find that? A developed property like one of these, which is in a small but thriving neighborly community. What if he's able to purchase a small property with a solar water well? Then he's got water. What if the house was well insulated to be able to withstand cold winters with no utilities? What if it was surrounded with renewable firewood? What if he and his family were able to work together to build fences and chicken houses and rabbit hutches, and then a fence around the garden? And if those things are not already there, they could work together on that, on weekends. He's got an ongoing supply then, if he does this, of food right in his backyard. And what if his garden shed was stocked with all the tools that he would need for a long time to keep that garden going for years, and those flocks of animals going for decades? And what if there was a separate building he could even use to make podcasts, as long as there's electricity and internet, and tell everybody what he's learning about living in a rural community? I mean, it's not like Hollywood has told us that small towns are evil. That happens not to be true, by the way. I live in a small rural community, and the Hollywood picture of it is absolutely the opposite. Now, so what if Joe's escape plan, plan B, was not isolation in the woods, but a place in a vibrant community far off in the country, but was together in a rural community? What if that community was committed to each other's prosperity and success? I mean, these are the questions I think we can ask about alternative plan Bs. What if their children in this community could intermarry and start other new homesteads around the area? What if all of them could live through a really bad collapse with everything they needed for a comfortable, civilized life? What if they could survive comfortably for a century, even if the nation lost things like trucking and the supply chain and the grid and the internet? Now, most of America has forgotten the genius of community commitment and community security. But America, this is what built America. America proved how it worked. And today there are still small rural counties which happen to have everything a family would need to thrive when the lights go out in the cities for a very long time. And some of those communities have a strong connection to reality. This is what makes them strong. Some of them have a strong connection to God, to God's creation, to God's ethics, and God's architecture for society, which is the very best architecture you can follow. Now, maybe plan A, and I'm just throwing this out here, would be that you keep your day job a little bit longer, you men who are listening to me, and then start selling stuff you don't need. And then on the weekends, go finding one of those islands of freedom and building a secure new life there. Because if you're in the city or in the wilderness, your life and your freedom are not secure. The first American immigrants, like I mentioned, they started off the American experiment in the woods. They had only a few tools, some trees for log cabins, some firewood, some dirt for crops. But because they lived in community, they helped each other. They made it. They survived. And it wasn't easy. And it won't be easy for you either. And it took courage and tenacity for all our fathers and ancestors who tried to do this and succeeded. But they prospered over time, and they built civilization in the process. And that goal of building an intact civilization is what drove them to create villages, a free market, marriages, families, roads, productive farms, courts of justice, an honest legal system, hospitals, churches, and more inventions every generation. And so all of my recommendations about making a plan A and making a plan B and making a plan C all involve communities, not just a secret campsite in the woods and not an isolated bunker with a 5-year supply of food. I mean, what good is that going to do, especially if things continue on in crisis for longer than 5 years? We've got 5 years of loneliness, and then what? What if things are still broken? So Joe is right. Families who try to go it alone will not make it. And America has a 4-century record of peace and prosperity in small rural counties. I'm Jeffrey Botkin.